I'm very happy to be here with Franco, my good friend, Franco Bifo Berardi from Bologna. We're so grateful to everybody at the Museo del Chopo for inviting us, Pacho, Francisco, and everybody on the team who's made this video possible. So thank you for having us. Yeah, Franco and I have been friends for quite some time. I've been very lucky to work with him on a few texts and even to hang out in Bologna and talk about various histories and presents and futures. So today we decided to meet and actually continue a conversation that we began last March about the situation globally with COVID in very specific terms and also in very broad terms. So we'll go back and forth between them. But Franco, thanks so much for being here with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to be in Mexico City. Always it's a pleasure for me to be in Mexico, virtually or physically. Better physically, I mean. But
I really wish it was physically, but so I guess I'll start with the question I actually wrote because I was rereading our conversation from last March. And in last March, I asked you this question. I said, what do you see as the horizon of possibility at a time like this, when certain biopowers and tactics of modern social control age and grow obsolete, and the reaction to save them grows still more violent? So it's been almost a year since we had that conversation, and you responded with a lot of different thoughts, all of them very interesting. But one in particular seems to have resonated with what continued this last year. You said, all of a sudden, the pandemic has reactivated the future as a space of possibility, because the automatisms that disabled political subjectivity in the past neoliberal decades have been broken, or at least destabilized. So I'm gonna reiterate my question, hoping that it's neither tragic nor farcical, and say, what do you see as the horizon of possibility at a time like this? And how do you think that horizon changed over the last year?
it's interesting, the opportunity, the possibility of rethinking, reassessing what we said almost 1 year ago, at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had the intuition that the pandemic was, as you said before, was reopening the game. And actually, the game is open, is as open as we could never imagine in the past. But when the game is open, things happen, and the landscape is changing at every moment. So, what now? I like the idea of talking about this ever-changing situation, but at the same time, I am a little bit shy or frightened by the possibility of having a bad effect on those who are listening. I know what I say is not that important. I do not want to, but if just one person, a friend, a comrade, someone like you, Andreas, a friend and a comrade and a young person, if what I say can have a depressive effect of someone like you, I think that I am wrong. I don't want to do that. So please let me be crazy, but do not follow me. 1 year ago, we said the game is reopened. The game still is open, but today we are going through a phase of extreme danger. I want to use a metaphor to say it. I would say that the noose is tightening around the neck of the humankind. What is the noose? The noose of absolute capitalism, of neoliberal absolute capitalism. Let's look at what is happening in two domains of social life, of the planetary becoming. One is communication, and the other is the bio dimension, the sanitary dimension, and the possibility for human life to go on. I have the impression that on those two domains, our neck is taken in the nose of financial capitalism. Look at what is happening at the level of the vaccine. How do you say in English, vaccine or vaccine? Vaccine. La vacuna. La vacuna. The European states, I want to speak about the European situation. Europe has financed big corporations like Pfizer to produce the vaccine for the European population. Why do we need a private corporation for doing that? But it's obvious, because in the last 10, 20 years, the European states have destroyed, have definanced the school, the medicine faculties, the research, the public health, and so on and so on. So we entered in the pandemic without sanitary masks, without medics, doctors, without the possibility of a public intervention. So we went to Pfizer and similar corporations. Now we have paid, the public organization have paid for this, for the development of the vaccine, and now the vaccine is ready, and we must pay to buy the vaccine. We pay before, we pay after. But Pfizer decided the agreement with the European Union can be broken, because they want to sell their vaccine to different buyers who pay more than Europe. Israeli is paying $28 for every dose, and the Israeli state up to now is not giving to Palestinians in the territories the possibility of getting the vaccine. Let me say that this is horrible. I don't say more. So our neck is taken in the nose of the privatization of everything. Privatization of health, privatization of research, and so on and so on. The same is happening in the field of communication. Just 2 weeks ago, we discovered that the president of the United States, whose name was Donald Trump, a criminal, a fascist, a pig, has been forbidden to use his Twitter account. Is it good? Is it bad? Please, let's remember that Mr. Dorsey was very friendly with Donald Trump as long as Donald Trump was a winner. Donald Trump has been allowed to do whatever he wanted before, when he was threatening people in the street, when he was insulting Black people or Muslim people. Jack Dorsey was friendly with him. When Donald Trump changed his position and turned a loser, at that point, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg and so on decided that he was out of the game. This is very dangerous because the majority of our discourse, of our talk is going through Zoom, like now, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Google, and so on. That means that we have put our neck inside the noose of big corporation. That is my description of the situation. And the pandemic has created a situation in which the noose is tightening and tightening because we are totally, what can we do when Pfizer is saying this is the vaccine and we will not give you the vaccine if you don't pay more and so on and so on. That is the situation. It's not a situation without escape because chaos is the king. That is the point. And chaos is an enemy, but he is also a friend. Sometimes chaos is a friend. So my point now is that we must not be frightened by chaos. We must not wage war against chaos. Those who wage war against chaos will be defeated because chaos feeds upon war. So let's think about the possibility that in the chaotic situation we cannot find for friendship and for the good of society.
I think that the last point you said is perfect. That chaos is an enemy, but it's also our friend, because it gets at this double nature that so many comments you just raised bring up, right? Like in the case of occupied Palestine, the party who is doing the colonizing is also the party that is refusing sanitary aid, right? I mean, the example I can draw in the States, and I forget which state this is, but a state in the Midwest of the so-called United States declared meat packers essential workers so that everybody can continue to eat meat, even though they had one of the highest incidences of COVID transmission. But it's only when the vaccine comes around that that same governor says they're not essential enough for the vaccine. They don't deserve it, but they must continue to go to work, right? And this is this thing that we were talking about, that we can critique the notion of biopolitics all we want, but it has never been more apparent than in a moment like this, where the sanitary crisis is met with the neoliberal crisis, right? Similarly, in the United States, as you're describing in Europe, public healthcare, what little existed, has been utterly dismantled. I mean, just in New York City, where I live, we've lost 20,000 hospital beds in 20 years, which would have come in handy. But we also have a $6 billion police budget that has only been enforced throughout the last years. On the notion of chaos, both being a space of possibility and a space of restraint, I'm going to refer back to our conversation once more. And I'm thinking here of something like the burning down of the 3rd police precinct in Minneapolis. I bring up that example not only because it inspired hope all over the States and also elsewhere. I remember last week reading a letter from a Russian anarchist saying after the protests in Moscow how they were inspired by the burning down of this police precinct. But more importantly, that in a poll conducted after they burned down the police station, 53% of Americans who were polled expressed support for that action. Meaning that in general, if there is a sense of extolling nonviolence, violence can also be accepted when it is necessary. And so we talked last year about how the COVID pandemic followed what you called the rebellions of 2019, the uprisings of 2019. And you said that the global revolt that erupted in 2019 was a sort of convulsion of the worldwide social body. These different rebellions were not able to find a common strategy, for now at least. So the convulsion resulted in a collapse. But now we are in something like a paralysis that follows collapse. So if that paralysis followed collapse, can I ask what you think followed paralysis? And I'm referring here to the riots in Naples in October, in Haiti, the incredible insurrections and rebellions happening in India, in Russia, in Thailand, all throughout the so-called United States. So if we are to keep that train, convulsion, collapse, paralysis, what comes next?
The word convulsion is, in my opinion, is explaining much of our condition. What is a convulsion? Convulsion is a involuntary reaction, unconscious reaction of a body which is on the brink of suffocation, on the brink of death. And actually, the social body has been pushed to the brink of suffocation. The metaphor of breathing here is really, if you suffocate, your brain is losing the ability of thinking, of elaborating a strategy. So a convulsion is a not totally conscious reaction of a body on the brink of suffocation. And in a sense, this is what has happened in the world in the fall 2019. I do not deny that many of the people who have taken to the streets in November, December of 19 were perfectly conscious of what they were doing. Think of Chile, for instance. Santiago de Chile, the cities of Chile have been full of people for 3 months and still are full of people because the Chilean people are fighting, are going, and they were quite conscious of the problem, rewriting the constitution, canceling the Nazi constitution of Pinochet, which was a neoliberal constitution. Chile is the place where we can understand what has happened in the last 40 years. September 11, 1973 has been the beginning of our time. One, because a Nazist, Augusto Pinochet, has destroyed the democracy, has killed 30,000 people, and so on and so on. But Nazism and neoliberal reform have been totally integrated. Who was behind Augusto Pinochet? Henry Kissinger, the Chicago boys of the neoliberal strategy, and so on. So a Nazi liberal regime has been imposed with the force, and the Chilean population in 19 were totally conscious that their problem was coming out of the neoliberal Nazis constitution. And so many other people in Paris, in Hong Kong, in Barcelona, in Quito, in La Paz, have been fighting consciously. But the general process was essentially chaotic. And it's not meaningless that in those days many young people were wearing the mask of the Joker. The movie by Philip Todd, you can like it or not, but is very interesting as a political interpretation of the contemporary suffering. The majority of people are suffering in the effects of 40 years of destruction of every social solidarity. So neoliberalism has been production of suffering, of craziness, of anguish, of misery, of depression. This is essentially, and that condition is not good for the strategical thought. That is the point. So we have to live inside the riots. We have to be part of the revolt. But at the same time, we have to be conscious of the fact that inside the revolt, something is lacking. What is lacking? A strategical view. I know that I am an old person, so probably I see things in an old way, strategy, and maybe that the point is no more to imagine a conscious strategical avant-garde. It's no more the point, but the point is when, how will we, the majority of the population, the workers, the women, the people who are oppressed and exploited, when will they be able to create a form which is able to go beyond the neoliberal capitalist absolute? That is the point. How can we come out from this trap? And the convulsion is not enough. That is the point. So the pandemic condition, it has been, up to a certain point, the possibility of clearly understanding what is the enemy. The enemy is the privatization of everything, is the capital dictatorship that destroys every kind of solidarity. Understanding that has been important, but it's not enough, because now we have to understand something more. What is the new form that can take shape somewhere maybe in a proliferating way? This is why I say convulsion. Then comes the collapse. The pandemic has been the collapse. The collapse has provoked a sort of stop, of deflation. All of a sudden, the acceleration has stopped and the rhythm has slowed. For a while, for many days, months, we have been listening to the silence, looking for a possibility of new social solidarity. But now I see that the forces of the neoliberal dictatorship are back and are trying to take the upper hand once more. That is the situation in which we are now. It's incredible how much the neoliberal ideology, the neoliberal discourse is reproposing itself. After all the destruction it has provoked, it's coming back. It's coming back. Why is it coming back? Because we are unable to escape the trap, because we are unable to create another imagination of our future. That is the point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there again that feeds into each other and creates something like a picture. The first one, I think your description of how fascism and neoliberalism work together is incredibly valid. There's a group called the Research and Destroy, and they put out a text some years ago when Trump was elected, calling him a fascist without fascism. So a Mussolini without his Italy, right? And I think the events at the United States Capitol a few weeks ago attest to that. And on the question of what is to be done, I really like how Idris Robinson reformulated Lenin's famous phrase to instead say, to speak on the insurrections this summer, to instead say how it should be done. Meaning there are available forms and they maybe perhaps shouldn't be organized in a way that you're describing. The question of organization is really complicated. But I think you're right. I think there's a difference between let's say Western Europe, where there's been some pretty strict lockdown restrictions, right? Sometimes telling you that you can only leave within 1 kilometer of your house. And if you do, then you receive hefty fines. In the States, there have been no such things. There have been recommendations that are not enforced. Meanwhile, they're enforcing other regimes of control. So undocumented people are still harassed. People of color are still killed by the police. But there hasn't been this sort of a using of the sanitary system to really enforce that, at least not the same like as has been in Europe. And I think because of that, it hasn't really felt like a stop here, at least. You know, like American production only fell by 5% last year, which, considering the way we talked about the crisis, is quite astounding. I mean, 5% is a lot, but it's still pretty astounding. I guess about this changes that you're noticing, you were very generous and shared a text with me that you're writing, which we're going to talk about because the text itself is very interesting. But just on this topic, I wanted to remind you something you said, which I think is very interesting. You said, the left has identified itself, and I know that you don't like the term left. The left has identified itself with those who play by the rules, who keep their distance, who behave themselves. There is a comedy role exchange, whereby fascists are the defenders of freedom and progressives are the defenders of the law. This too signals the dissolution of the 20th century political landscape. I hope that's an okay translation. I translated it very quickly last night. But to say there has been this switch. And I think one place where we can talk about that is what happened at the US Capitol on January 6th, which you described as the center of the American abyss. We could also talk about the far-right riots that happened in the Netherlands last week, but which were joined by migrant youth who definitely should not be put in the same camp as the people who are organizing these violence. I'm trying to find a quote by a guy named Peter Gelderloos, an anti-fascist researcher, who says something that I think resonates with your quote very well. He said, "Our history shows us it is never a good idea to let the right monopolize social conflict. Have we already forgotten Ukraine?" And so he tells us that we need to maybe not think about forms, but think about how we can intervene in these, as you describe them, organic insurrections that are responses to either a deceleration in one place or an acceleration of other violence on the other. So can you maybe, before we talk about your amazing COVID inquiry survey, can you tell us what you mean by this comedy role exchange, whereby fascists are defenders of freedom and progressives are defenders of the law, as you say?
that is an interesting but very complicated subject, because in this change of the roles in the comedy, you can see, one, the problematization of the concept of freedom, one. Second, the trap in which subjectivity is taken at the present. A writer that I like very much, whose name is Jonathan Franzen, wrote, among many other books, wrote a book titled Freedom, in which he says people came to this country, America, looking for two things: money and freedom. But only few got money. So the majority of them, of those people who came to that country, the majority not gaining money enough, grasped desperately to freedom. Freedom of what? What is the freedom of a North American proletarian? Freedom of having a gun, freedom of beating his wife, freedom of being desperate and fix with fentanyl. This is the freedom. The problem is that we have entered, we, I mean me and you, and the left, the intellectuals, the modern intelligentsia has accepted the word freedom without critique, without understanding what is the meaning of that. If I am allowed to be for 2 minutes the philosopher that I am not, I would quote Spinoza in this case. And I would say that the problem is not freedom. The real problem is potency. The romantic culture has put freedom on the top of everything. And so we have imagined that being free means to do whatever we like to do, killing people, colonizing the miserable South, and so on and so on. But the problem is that we are free to do only what we have the potency to do. If I want to be free of jumping down from the skyscraper and fly, that freedom is nothing, does not work. I don't have the potency of doing that. So the modern soul has been taken between a sort of hysterical desire of freedom that has fueled aggressiveness, imperialism, fascism, machismo, and so on and so on. I am free of doing whatever I want. If you don't like, I kill you, I rape you. But we have not really, I mean, the modern thought has not been able to elaborate the relation between freedom and potency. I am free to do what I have the potency to do, and potency is not happening individually. Potency is a social construction is the construction of the condition of freedom. This is why I think that the United States of America is dead. I think that the political entity called United States of America has reached the point of no return. At the point, Trump has been a sort of declaration of impotent omnipotence of the American people, declaring that we are free to do whatever you want means that we are allowed to destroy whatever is impeaching my freedom. At the end, Trump has been defeated. Yes, I know. But what is happening now? At the point, I mean, I trust Biden. I see that he's promising interesting things. He's promising that he will close private jails, for instance. I am happy of listening to this. But I trust his goodwill. But the problem is that the goodwill, maybe Biden has converted to socialism. I hope so. The problem is that his goodwill is not enough, because the problem now is deconstructing the effects of 2 centuries of systematic racism, systematic violence, systematic misunderstanding of the concept of freedom. This kind of mistaking freedom and violence and suprematism and so on. So what you said before is questioning the problem of subjectivity. It's our subjectivity that now is the real problem. What's happening to social subjectivity? What's happening to social solidarity? What's happening to the social body, to the erotic body of society? So I have engaged in a research about this point. And I did a sort of inquiry, an investigation, how can I say, a small investigation. I sent how do you say, a questionnario, some questions to my friends, to young friends, students, people that I don't know, people that I know, young people in their 20s, in their 30s, asking them very basic questions like, would you kiss an unknown person that you like very much and who is like you very much, but you meet in the street? Would you accept a physical contact with the unknown? Or questions like, how do you imagine? What do you imagine of your life in the next 5 years, and so on? So now I am trying to analyze the answers. I am writing something about that because my point is, will we be able to kiss each other again? And you say, kiss, what strange problem for an old person like me. Yeah, I know. But I remember that the Ministry of Health of Canada, not really the ministry, the main person of the health system of Canada 2 months ago, in September actually, said in a public declaration, she said, skip kisses. In the case you have sexual relations, don't forget to wear a sanitary mask And in any case, in the present situation, the best is going solo. I don't blame that lady for this. She told something that was, I mean, she was obliged to say that, and I understand. It's not my problem. I don't want to look like an irresponsible defensor of freedom in the fascist sense of the word. No, not at all. But I wonder. I am thinking, what's going to happen to people 20 years old, 15 years old, young, very young people who are told skip kisses? What's going to happen in their mind? What's going to happen in their body, in their sexual expectations? And when I say sexual expectations, I am talking of the condition for social solidarity. Social solidarity is not based on ideals, it's based on the pleasure of being together. What's happening to the pleasure of being together, to the new generation of humans? That is my political question. Political.
But I do want to go back to your survey, because I was really, I mean, it's problematic and it's difficult to think about political subjectivity through sexual subjectivity, you know. But you also say something very interesting, a short thing, that contagion has forced us to put desire to second place, or even third, fourth, fifth place. And I think that's a valid point. But the interesting and the scary part is that you say this is not good conditions for building autonomy. So on the one hand, I totally agree with you. On the other hand, I also might ask you to problematize this, because I have seen through the insurrections over the summer, I'm not admitting any involvement with anything on the air, but I have witnessed street medics learning, I mean, especially in places like Portland and Seattle, but in New York, we are learning how to take care of each other. At every demonstration I went to, there were queer people, there were trans people, there were people of color, there were socialists, and they were all handing out food, handing out masks, taking care of each other, typically at a distance. So on the one hand, yes, the desire being put behind certainly stops some creation of autonomy. But I wonder whether you think it also creates conditions for other forms of autonomy. What do you think?
I don't want to look dogmatic Guattarian Deleuzian. I'm not dogmatic. I am Guattarian Deleuzian, but not dogmatic. And it's impossible to be dogmatic in the field of Deleuzian thought. But I think that there is not one thing among others. Desire is the condition for sharing a project. What is the meaning of the word desire? That is important. Desire is not sexual drive. It's much more rich. Desire is the tendency to creation. Desire is the coming out of a project. A project is based on this tending towards the world. The creation of the social world is essentially a problem of sharing the same desire. Before I said strategy, we need a strategy. But strategy, we can think a strategical thought when we share the same tendency, the same going to the same drive, the same desire. So when I emphasize so much the problem of erotic approachability, of the erotic dimension of being together, I mean society, the, the, the only thing that we really possess is the ability to produce a flow of desire that is changing the mind of the majority of society. We have nothing. We have no money, we have no media, we have no weapons, we have no political power. Sometimes, notwithstanding this having nothing, sometimes we have been able to create a social movement, to create a transformation, to win, if I can use this horrible word that means nothing. And why? So if we have nothing, what do we have? We have the ability to suscitate, to stimulate a common desire. This is, in my personal experience, my small political experience. If I remember what happened in the 70s in Italy, we had nothing. But all of a sudden, we had the ability to say words, to make gestures, to suggest possibilities that stimulated a majoritarian, a very large flow of common desire. This is why I say it's important, enormously important, to understand what happens in the social unconscious. When I use the expression social unconscious, I know that it's impervious to use. I don't even know if the social unconscious exists. I know that the social brain has a dimension that is not reducible to rational thought. Imagination. What is imagination? Imagination is the ability to mentally create something that is not yet existing. Remark that I said, yet existing. Imagination is the ability to recombine what we know according to a different design, to a different combination. So imagination is essentially recombination of what we know in such a way that we create something that is not yet known. But what is the fuel of imagination? Is desire. Desire of being together with that person, desire of sharing the same social environment, desire of having adventures that are impossible if I am obliged to be a salaried worker inside. So you see, this is why I think that the problem of desire and imagination is the only condition that we have to have potency. And so, to have freedom. There is no freedom without potency, and there is no potency without desire.
that's actually one of the reasons why your survey and the text you sent me with responses to your survey is so nice. I mean, you said you felt distance from people and you wanted to feed your brain with other people's thoughts. I think that's very nice. And that's a form of collectivity that is emerging, not, or I shouldn't say because of, but in spite of these various forms of distanciation and alienation that you're describing. And this recombination, it could take a lot of different forms. And I do want to talk about that. You mentioned that we, again, let's just say you and me, we, no media, no weapons, no money. At the same time, I mean, speaking as somebody who was involved with Radio Alice, the pirate radio station in Bologna, and speaking in a place like Museo del Chopo that, was involved with the punk community who organized their own pirate radio station at this legendary street market in Mexico City that I'm not going to mispronounce. But there is also some form of freedom and, again, desire in the way that you're describing it that comes from the creation of the possibility to make our media. And yes, from the possibility of arming ourselves if so necessary, or the possibility of breaking GameStop, without allying with homophobic fascists who are on, those threads on the internet that produced that stuff. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about the possibility for creating our own media, the possibility for finding collectivity in desire, in taking control of telling history? Yeah.
That is a crucial point. Yes, I said that we have no money, no weapons, and no media. And I don't know if I want to call it a medium. Was Radio Alice a medium? Yes and not. A medium, in a sense, is a tool, a technology that makes possible the passage of a content, of a message, if you want, and is also producing the message itself in a certain way. Radio Alice was a sort of surfing the media, was an attempt to be in the field of media, but with the intention that for some days, some months became a winning intention, became a reality of dissolving the instrumentality of the medium itself. But let's forget about Radio Alice that is so far in time. There is another experience which is much more next, much more close, less distance and in time. In the media is almost forgotten in the memory of the movements, but it was an extraordinary experience of self-organization. I remember that experience because I was involved in the creation of indie media since the beginning, and it was what was in the media. Maybe that young people don't even know what it was. In the media was Facebook before Facebook, was Twitter before Twitter, and it was a sort of network of concatenation of small groups of activists living in every part of the world, in India, in Italy, in the United States, in Mexico, everywhere, in every city. There was a group of people who were making information about their own situation, but at the same time had the possibility of exchanging daily information and words with people. In the media was important in the years of Seattle, in the years of Genova, in the years of the so-called no global movement, which was much more the contrary. It was the global movement of anti-capitalist people in the world. In the media was a condition for exchanging local information in a network that was emphasizing the global meaning. What was the meaning of in the media? It's important to recall the meaning of the no global movement. We were saying, beware. If the neoliberal form of capitalism is able to dominate our future, we are going to lose democracy. We are going to lose the possibility of deciding about our own life. We are going to lose everything. 20 years ago, there was a global movement saying, stop with capitalism because capitalism is destroying our life. Well, 20 years after, the nose is tightening around our neck. Why in the media has disappeared at a certain point? Well, I must remember that in the year 2001, the cupola, how do you say, the head of global capitalism met in an Italian city called Genova. In July 2001, the 8 powers of the world, 8 killers like George Bush, like Vladimir Putin, and like Silvio Berlusconi met in the city of Genova. And they decided, the movement was demonstrating in the streets and protesting against this kind of takeover of democracy by the G8, and the Italian state, supported by the American Secret Service, killed one demonstrator and aggressed a demonstration of 300,000 people. That was a moment of total aggression and violence. Then they entered the media center of the movement, which was in a school, in an elementary school of the city of Genova. They destroyed the tools of the media center. They arrested hundreds of people who were there. They brought them in a barrack in the outskirts of Genova, and they tortured people all the night long. Torture was back in the democratic state of Italy. This is a story that we should recount every day, because it was the moment of a fascist aggression of the neoliberal state against peaceful demonstrators in the streets. The day after, in the media was dead, because the people who were animating the network were alarmed, unable to react to such a violence. I remember the discussion that we had in those days, and we said each other, we can react to this violence only when we have weapons to fight against those weapons. We cannot, you see, but Now, the problem of in the media is back. We now need to withdraw from the domination of Facebook. I am ashamed of being a subscriber of Facebook. I am inside that machine. My face is one of the 2 billion faces of Facebook. Why am I obliged to do that? Because I know that I have no tools, no voice, nothing. So if I want to say a word to my friends, I am obliged to use Facebook. Why so? Why? Because we have been unable in the last 20 years to create a space for autonomous communication. I think that the American movement, which in this moment is the world avant-garde of the movement, should work in this direction together with our comrades and friends who are working inside Facebook, inside Google, because the thousands of people who are creating a union inside Google, the thousands of Facebook workers who are exploited by Mark Zuckerberg, those people can create from inside the new medium that you need more than ever. So it is I think we should launch a claim, an appeal, a call to the creation of the autonomous media, of free thinkers from the inside the machine itself.
Let's talk a bit about the social body. The social body.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about what I'm seeing in New York City. And I'll give one example. One example is a group that I like to talk about a lot called Woodbine, where you've spoken. It's a cultural autonomous hub in Ridgewood, Queens, in a working class, mostly immigrant neighborhood. They founded kind of in the years after Occupy, sort of very much a space coming out a decade later from the anti-globalization movement that you were describing, even though many of the folks are much younger. But at the beginning of the pandemic, they shifted their space from being a space of lectures and dinners and conferences and screenings to a food pantry. And at this point, they're feeding about 3,000 families a week sometimes, completely autonomously, completely unaffiliated with the state or any charity formations. And I think this is an interesting example to bring up because there has been an absolute, at least from my mind, and maybe this is just because I wasn't paying enough attention before, but there's been an explosion, proliferation of magazines, zines, pamphlets, stickers, propaganda, food distribution. Things have been trading hands throughout the pandemic, throughout the insurrections. And I wonder if you consider this, given that you played an integral part in a very important, for lack of a better word, counterculture. I don't know if you would use that word. But talking about indie media, do you think that we are seeing a resurgence of a counterculture that is more interested in being autonomous? How would you talk about this?
Well, the very expression counterculture is difficult to interpret nowadays. I mean, what exactly is a counterculture? Is it a phenomenon that happens outside of the existing mediascape? Or is it a sort of permanent contradiction, transforming the mediascape from the inside? If we think what counterculture was in the 60s and in the 70s, actually, in that time, counterculture was essentially a phenomenon separated and opposed to the dominant culture and the dominant media. But this is the reason was exactly to, in order to name again the cognitarian force, the reason was that the sphere, the infosphere, the media sphere was separated from social labor. Was essentially something that was the projection of professionals with no relation with social work. Now I think that counterculture has to be something that infiltrates the mediascape. Actually, the experience of indie media has been an experience of infiltration also, and I mean, actually, I see that experience like Woodbine are the place, are the dimension in which new projects can be created, but we should not accept the limitation of being outside, of being in a totally external dimension. I think that this is the mistake, the error that we made in the 80s. If I remember, after the experience of Radio Alice and of the autonomous media in Italy, in Germany very much. In Germany, the autonomous communication was important in the 70s. Then we mistook radicalism with a sort of refusal to infiltrate. And that was a mistake, because we stayed outside the media transformation, and we have been unable, for instance, to counter, to sabotage from the inside the experience of Berlusconi. You know, Berlusconi would never been so strong without the previous experience of the free radios in Italy, and the workers who worked in the corporation of Berlusconi were my friends, people coming out from our autonomous. That was our mistake, our inability to think the possibility of creating a sort of counter television inside the sphere of dominant media. That sabotage and autonomy cannot be separated. And if you want to be a successful saboteur, you have to be very close to the machine. If you want to destroy the machine, you have to be able to infiltrate. I think that in the 70s, we finally have lost, have missed the possibility of being simultaneously autonomy and sabotage. In the future, if we have the force and the ability to put together those precarious workers who are suffering because of capitalist exploitation, we have to be able to transform them into sabotage workers and autonomous human beings. It's so difficult to speak of this subject today. You know why? It's so difficult because I feel that we have an enormous, when I say we, I mean those people who won't get free from capitalist exploitation. And we have an enormous strength that is in our social condition, and an enormous weakness that is in our psychological condition. You see, its subjectivity is in danger, is weak nowadays. But if we are able to create a small machine for the multiplication of desire, for the viral proliferation of a desiring project of equality, of frugality, of pleasure, if we can create this small machine, that may be the beginning of a process of total sabotage and transformation of the machine of power.
In the post-68 moment, the idea was get the fuck out. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that. The idea was to get out, you know? And in the 80s, the idea was, let us subvert, let us enter. And both those techniques, if uncoupled from a genuine understanding of the terrain that the institution sketches, right, fails. Because if you exit, you are still inside the system, just different way. And if you enter, you will be recuperated. Your technique will be taken. And something that I found very interesting is in recent movements that have taken the museum as a site of contestation, specifically the Whitney Museum in New York City in 2 years ago, was that they were both inside and outside. So they went inside the museum to protest, but they had anti-jail groups, anti-gentrification groups, anti-police groups, creating a citywide network. So you're both inside and outside. And maybe you don't believe the idea of autonomy, aesthetic autonomy that the museum says exists. You don't believe it, but you pretend like you do, because you can come in there and the police won't beat you up so quickly and you have a space to work. I think that's very interesting. Yeah, last question. We're in a museum virtually. We're at the Museo del Chopo. We're speaking about counterculture. We're speaking about art and cultural workers investing in social struggles. How do you think today, given your history of involvement in various movements, how do you think today artists, cultural workers, this other group of social subjectivity that we haven't discussed so much, how can they relate to revolutionary activity, resistance? And I think the notion that was proposed to us with this talk was dissent. So what is the place of culture producers in creating or disseminating dissent?
The first step now is a sort of, for me personally, the first step has been and is to try to reactivate my antennas, my sensible antennas. I've been alone for 10 months now. It's the first time in my life. I have always been a very sociable person. I've been teaching all my life. I've been going into social centers, meeting young persons, and all of a sudden I am alone. And so I tried to reactivate my antennas with this act of investigation. But I'm not sure that the results, the outcome of this investigation has been so happy. I'm a little bit depressed, frankly speaking, of the results of my investigation, but it has been a way to start a talk with young friends about their desire, and my desire, about their suffering and my suffering, and so on. I think that the first action that we should start as artists, as intellectuals, and as activists is a sort of investigations on mental suffering. We have not spoken in these 2 hours, we have not spoken of the psychological collapse that is underway. It is not only an effect of the pandemic, first it's an effect of capitalist competition, of precarious condition, then it's an effect of the pandemic isolation. So our first task is speaking with people, very close, with or without sanitary mask, and ask them, do you think that in your life there will be a possibility of happiness, of friendship, of pleasure, if we don't come out from the capitalist hell? That is the first act that we have to do, I think. Thank you.